Okay, well, looks like everyone's here, who's going to be here, so we'll start with the reading of the hearing notice, and then we'll get into it. So, in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 11, notice is hereby given that the Bolton Zoning Board of Appeals will hold a continuation of the public hearing on Wednesday, March 26, 2019, at 7 p.m. in Town Hall, Board of Selectmen Room at 663 Main Street, Bolton, to hear and act upon the application of Still River Road Development, LLC, and Shamies and Farrell, PC. The applicant is seeking a comprehensive permit for a proposed housing development to be located in Bolton's residential zoning district on Still River Road, identified on Assessors Map 8B as parcel 32, parking 6.68 acres. The applicant is seeking a comprehensive permit to construct 8 units of home ownership housing pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40B. The development consists of 4 2-unit duplex-style buildings located on 2 lots, each containing 2 duplex buildings. In accordance with Mass General Law, the development will contain 2 affordable units. So, sticking to the format, we'll have an update from our applicant, and then we'll review items that have come in. There's been some architectural design review board correspondence between the applicant and the board. Revised grading, probably some new plans, looking like removing buildings and porches from the 25-foot wetland buffer, wetland data from Ecotech, review waivers from given to us at the end of the last meeting, and it looks like the applicant provided some draft condominium documents today, so we'll just sort of walk through that process, and then we'll talk about timing for our next meeting, likely, so we can have a review of a draft decision document and work toward closing the hearing. So that's the process for tonight, and we'll start with a question in the back. But
excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could you please speak louder?
Even in this room?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
Even in this room. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. So I'll just do a quick repeat for we'll have an update from the applicant, and then we'll review remaining items that have come in so far. We have architectural design review information, revised grading, removal of building porches from 25-foot wetland buffer, wetland data, revised list of waivers, and draft condominium documents. So that is, we'll start with that type of outline. There's things that I mentioned that aren't relevant, we won't, we'll move to something different. So we'll start with the applicant.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce Attorney Adam Costa. Adam has recently joined our development team, and so you at some point may be hearing from Adam as well. So to give you an update, I will run through some.
Is his role general, or is it specific to litigation, or is it?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes, okay.
Zoning attorney, land use attorney,
Okay.
does do litigation as well. As you mentioned, one of the deliverables from the last meeting, I had told the board I would be sending a memorandum to the design review board, which I did do last week, and I know you have a copy, and I gave Erica some additional copies. Essentially what I did with the design review board is I went through our notes from our meeting with them and outlined all of the suggestions that they had given us as part of their review of the project. And so what I did was provide them a listing of all of the suggestions that they had asked us to look at, and explain to them which of those we were able to integrate into the revised plans, which is certainly the majority of things. I mean, a lot of them are real architectural details about extending roofs and wrapping stone and changing, architectural. So I gave them a detailed explanation of what we did integrate into the project. I also gave them some updated renderings, as well as an updated set of project plans, because some of their suggestions had to do with site plan sort of things as much as structural architectural comments. So I did in my letter mention to the design review board that we were still in the process with this board, and if they had any other comments or suggestions, I suggested they send them in to you and to us as well.
So are these the renderings? Those-
Yeah.
Mhm.
Those renderings actually, if you look at them in the context of the letter, you can pick up some of the things where I say we wrap this, you can see some of it, but it's on there.
Mhm.
The other thing I had hoped to get to you by last Friday were the condominium documents. As you'll see, they're quite extensive. I was only able to wrap them up this week, so they're a new submission to you this evening, so I don't expect you to have seen them, but certainly having to discuss any questions regarding the condo docs when we next meet. I tried to integrate into those documents provisions for maintenance of all of the private systems, water, sewer, stormwater, etc., a driveway, garbage, collect, all of the standard provisions. I also provided you a draft condominium budget, just so that you could see an idea of the kinds of items that we would be specifically collecting for and budgeting for. And again, you'll see there are line items for water system maintenance, sewer, septic maintenance, et cetera, as well as reserve funds for each of those components, so that each month the association will be putting money aside for the future repair and replacement of some of those major systems. It is a draft budget. Obviously, once we see what a comprehensive permit may or may not include in terms of requirements, then we'll be able to get better numbers on some of our maintenance contracts, and we can sharpen the pencil on that. But I think it gives you a good understanding in a context of the kinds of monies we're talking about. That budget, and if anything, it might be a little low. Certainly I didn't over budget, or my client and I in working on it didn't over budget, but you'll see that the condo fee is estimated at somewhere around $184. I suspect that might grow up closer to $200, but still, I think in today's housing market, a very reasonable condominium fee with respect to the units. So we are trying to keep that reasonable. And you'll also see within those documents there are many blanks in terms of dates of decisions, recording information, even final dates on plans and things that are referred to, because I suspect some of those will change as we wrap this up, and also once we start recording things, then all of that can be added. But again, I think they're very comprehensive and give you an understanding of what those documents are meant to be. The one thing I did not achieve since your last meeting was the Conservation Commission, through the board, has requested that we provide them the ecotech. You'll recall, in discussing the wetlands line and the Commission's concern about the wetlands line and our use of the line that they had previously approved, we did in fact agree to hire a third-party wetland scientist, Ecotech, to come in and double-check the wetlands, especially in light of the report we received from your peer reviewer and your conservation agent that they had gone on site and they thought there were some other areas that might or might not be wetlands. So we had Ecotech come in and check. You'll recall that they did agree that there was one area that we hadn't been identifying. We identified it, we put it on the plans, we modified the project to address those additional wetlands. In other cases, the wetland lines were moved slightly. Wherever they were moved to be more conservative, we put them on the plan, and again, we modified the plan to address those wetlands. Based on that revision, we had provided to you recently, or prior to the last meeting, a very detailed listing of our requested waivers, and those waivers are based on that revised wetland line. So, fast forwarding to the request, which was your conservation agent wanted to see the field notes from Ecotech associated with that redelineation. Ecotech has technically not finished the written technical portion of their review. They put their flags out there, but they do not have a final report. They're just waiting for a little break in the weather action here to go out and finish. Neither Ecotech nor my clients were comfortable giving the commission, giving the board incomplete field notes or an incomplete report. So we're gonna, as soon as we have that report, quite frankly, at that point, we're gonna be ready to file an NRAD with the Conservation Commission in any event. So that report will be provided to the Conservation Commission immediately once it's completed. I can't give you a date because, you know, if we get enough rain this weekend and enough warm weather, they could be out the following week. On the other hand, if we get another snowstorm, they could be held up. So that is the position of that report. I do want to say, well, let me jump to the next item and I'll wrap it all around. We did receive Mr. Pesnola's report of March 4th. Just recently, he has suggested two things. One is that we provide a written response to both the recent Board of Selectmen letter that was submitted to your board, as well as a written response to the most recent Conservation Commission letter. I'm happy to do both of those, respond to both of those, but I have to say, I feel that the Conservation letter, except for the sections where it says you shouldn't grant any waivers and you should deny the project, the background to the letter is similar to what we have seen and discussed at length at these meetings and in written correspondence, and that is the commission feels, and I do know some of the board members may agree, that they would prefer that we go and do a new NRAD with the commission and then make sure that the project's designed correctly and complete the process here. As we've discussed numerous occasions, that isn't the route we chose to take. We chose to rely on the commission's earlier delineation of the site. While we did acquiesce to bring in another reviewer and look at the wetlands again, that was as an accommodation and as preparation for our NRAD filing, but we are still of the mindset that we are presenting the project that you have with the wetlands that we've delineated, and we'd ask you to act on that. We are not in a position to go back and do an NRAD and essentially start this process over. So I will happy to respond to that letter, but what I'm going to respond to is what we've been saying all along, is we will go to the commission for an NRAD as soon as we get the Ecotech stuff, and that will probably be around or just after we're completed with this process. So that's where we stand there. But I will give written responses to that letter as well as the Board of Selectmen letter. Additionally, we were asked, and I'm going to turn this over to Seth in just a moment, we were asked to provide you new wetlands plans. I guess there was some concern about the ability to see all the different lines when they were all on the same plan. So I'll let Seth tell you more specifics, but I believe we actually cleaned that plan up and created a separate exhibit plan with just the wetland lines and delineations on it, so it's really clear to see. And also, I believe he presented a plan that shows the areas of disturbance within the buffer zone. I know there were some questions from the commission as well as this board about, what's the percentage of the 25-foot buffer you're disturbing, what's the percentage of other buffer zones, so I'll let Seth give you that. We updated the topography around the buildings and the stairs, and in the right-of-way work, we identified trees to be removed, and in fact, I understand Seth created yet another plan, the Stillwater River Road plan for drainage improvements, and that had to do with what we've agreed with the DPW director to do in terms of improvements out in the right-of-way. to help with flooding problems that are out there. So I'm gonna let Seth give you a quick overview of those two plans, and then lastly, one of the questions that was asked of us is could we move the two units that were intruding, I believe, the most into the 25-foot buffer? Could we move them out of that buffer? And Seth did a plan showing how we could accomplish that, but also has to explain to you what the implications are of that in terms of waivers. And I think he gave you a written letter that explained if we move the two units, what that would mean for our waivers, what new waivers we would need, or what waivers we wouldn't need. So I'm gonna let Seth give you an overview of the new wetlands plan, the exhibit plan for the right-of-way work, and then last but not least, the removal or movement of the two units out of the buffer zone.
Thanks.
I see most of you have the exhibit plan up, so I'm just gonna flip this to that real quick. So we were asked to clarify some of the buffer zone alterations, and so what we've shown in the yellow shaded areas, those are areas that are proposed to be altered within the 25-foot buffer zone. They total, and that includes compensatory flood storage area that's removed from the actual unit work area. The total is about 2,800 square feet, which equates to less than 1% of the site. And then we have the other buffer zones clearly delineated on this plan as well. So that was one of the plan clarification items we were asked to add. And one of the questions that we were presented with is could we move unit 1 and 2 to get it outside of the 25-foot buffer zone? So we've shown that as the gray hatch building, which would be sliding this forward. All of the units would still be able to meet their parking requirements. They have a garage, and then they have sufficient parking area within their garage, driveway, to meet all their requirements. And the only portion of unit 2 that would be in the 25-foot buffer zone is a portion, the back corner of the deck. So our letter of February 28th spelled out the specific setbacks that would be related to the movement of that unit. So previously we had spelled out a unit by unit distance that we would need to have relief from to allow the unit to be constructed. And so we've given you a synopsis of what those would change if we were to move these units. So obviously they're at an increased distance, so the entirety of the building could be outside of the 25-foot buffer zone, with the exception of a small portion of the unit 2 deck. To accomplish that, we have septic tanks in front of the buildings. Little failure. The blue septic tanks on this plan are where they were originally proposed. And the local Board of Health regulations require septic tanks to be 50 feet from wetlands. Title V, the State Environmental Code, requires septic tanks to be 25 feet from wetlands. So as we originally proposed them, we were in full compliance with the tank location that the Bolton Board of Health requires. To slide it forward, we would bump into our own septic tanks. So the orange area here, those would be the relocation of the tanks. And we would require a Board of Health waiver to allow the septic tank, which is the tank in the back here, to be closer to the wetlands than 50 feet. But they're still in full compliance with the State Environmental Code. So that's kind of a trade-off for getting the unit out of there. We would need that different waiver. So we could get an increased offset to the wetlands, but would need a waiver for from the Board of Health requirements for the septic tanks. So we've shown that on all of our plan sheets and called them out specifically as an alternative location of those. The intent would be for the board to choose which one is preferable to them in this case.
So you're saying that would be within 41 feet, and it technically should be 50 feet by
The local requirements require 50 feet for a tank,
right,
yeah.
But as it's presented there, it's 41, approximately
Correct.
41
Yeah.
feet, and you're saying the state guideline was?
State is 25 feet,
25.
so that's all the way back behind the unit, so it
That's
would be,
strictly Title V?
correct, yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
Attorney DeShane's mentioned that we had some questions about trees to be removed within the right of way. I believe we,
Before you go back, so on that plan you had, oh, what's, that one, no, that one there. the one you had up earlier. Does that address, excuse me, Erica's questions last time about the water? Is that,
It does, yeah, I think so. Pulling it out of the 25-foot buffer.
but you had questions about, you couldn't follow the line around the.
There was
or
a-
something.
on the
Is that-
PDF,
Is
there's
that
a
what
line
that
to
is,
it.
or is the red
I
line
mean,
there?
it's
is that-
helpful. I was just, it was sort of a general comment about their site plans, that it's, you know, when you sit down and you really look at trying to figure out where the buffer lines are,
Mhm.
where's the wetland line. Some of their line types don't come through all that well when they print the plan, and it just gets a little confusing. So I think they generated that exhibit to help.
So it is an improvement for you, because
It is an
you're doing a lot of
improvement.
work on this for, on our
Yeah,
behalf, so I
right.
wanna be sure that you're satisfied that, yeah, you can work with that. All right.
I can work with that.
Okay, thank you.
Seth, did you say 50 feet from for the septic tank to be, to the wetland?
That is the local board of health requirement.
Is
So
it
we,
50?
if-
No, it's,
I thought it was 100.
no,
I pulled, and maybe I'm looking at a older version of our Board of Health regulations, but I pulled it from their website, and it says, I have the dimensional schedule here.
I can
it's
check
100
it.
feet. And then the other thing too, it says for the leaching facility, I noticed on your list of waivers, you had noted 100 feet for the leaching field to the wetland, and this schedule says 150 feet, so, I don't know. Exactly, yeah, for soils that have, for tests for, yeah.
we will check that and give you a revised
Okay.
list then, thank you. And I'll just note on that list there, it provides for, under the local regulations, a reduction in the setbacks, a separate table if nitrogen reduction is incorporated, and that's something we had previously discussed in incorporating within the project. So we'll spell that out to you.
Mr. Chairman, just closing the loop on outstanding items. The Conservation Commission had asked for two things that this plan addresses. One was the percentage of the 25-foot no disturb, but they were also looking for the, what they called the 75-foot adjacent upland resource impact. So if they're addressing those, then that would be helpful, because that is something this board needs to act upon. It's not only the incursion into the 25, but just the approval of the comprehensive permit is approving the project under the local wetlands bylaw, which regulates that 75-foot as an upland wetland resource, or upland resource. So Rebecca had just asked for quantifying how much of the 75 was impacted by the project.
So, just so that I understand, make sure that we've delivered or will deliver. Seth had calculated the area of the 25-foot no disturb, both as a square footage, I think you said like 2,800 square feet, and as a percentage of total 25-foot disturbance on the site, you said it was less than 1%. Joe, are you suggesting Rebecca wanted that same number on the 75?
Yeah.
All right, that should be pretty easy
Yeah,
to
we can
send
provide
over
that.
tomorrow.
And I would say that's the majority of the site, correct?
Minus 800 square feet.
Yeah.
Round. And so that, what we're talking about, that equates to about 15, I think the number is 15 and change % of the site is the total project footprint between edge of wetlands and the disturbed area. So we'll clarify that in a letter to you too as well.
Is there a threshold?
No, it's just a
It's
regulated
just a
area,
point of
so
clarification.
this board acting in the shoes of the Conservation Commission, it's information that the Conservation Commission would have in their review. so she thought that you should have it. It may also be something that assists the Conservation Commission in possibly providing further input to the board in formulating conditions.
Perfect, thanks.
One other minor plan item that we were asked to address was clarification of the grading between the units. At one point, the fire chief had asked us to provide foot access between the retaining walls between the units. Some of the walls are only 2 feet tall. There's between 2 units in this area, there's some terraced walls. And we've provided, each lot will have its own set of stairways through there now. And we have now clarified the top of the retaining wall, the boulder wall, and the bottom of the wall. So that grading information is on the sheets as well now.
Seth, if you don't mind, I just wanted to point out something about the grading, because there was one other area that needed to be clarified, that was back here. And it's really minor, but it just needs to be cleaned up. So for example, this contour here has a label at 233 and a label at 231.
Okay, we'll clean that
So
up.
that, I believe it's 231, but then when you actually look at it, it goes from 232, 231, and then, there's another contour, and then this contour here is labeled as 230, so I don't know what this extra contour is, so you just may want to clean that up a little bit.
We appreciate that, and we'll make sure that's there.
Director, did the applicant get the Sudbury Valley?
They did receive a,
Okay.
I don't want to try to.
Joe, would you mind so we had some questions from, I think, in Butter regarding,
Subdivision?
yes.
The regulations require that the submission to the zoning board include a preliminary subdivision plan if applicable, and they've done that. But that plan is not adequate for actually recording at the registry of deeds. So the way that it's normally done, this would be considered an approval not required subdivision plan, which is normally endorsed by the planning board. You would sit in the planning board's role in endorsing that approval not required plan at some point in the future. So one of the conditions of the approval would be that, a properly prepared approval not required plan that met the rules of the registry of deeds would be presented to the board, possibly with final plans, and that the board would consider endorsing that. Just so you all know, because you're not planning board members, or that you sat in planning board for a long time, and some may know, but all the board is doing is endorsing that it in fact does not need subdivision approval through the Subdivision Control Act.
I'm a little confused as an ex-planning board member. Since it's requires all these waivers, which would normally not be part of an A&R process, how does that jive with the, I mean, it's kind of a,
It's,
it's rinky dink.
right, but with, understand from community to community, the A&R subdivision process is different. Some
Understand that.
planning boards make the applicant put right on the plan, no determination of zoning compliance is inferred here or herein. Because under the approval not required statute, it needs to have frontage on a way that, and there's several categories of the types of ways that it needs to have frontage on. And I think we can all agree Still River Road most likely meets that requirement as a way. And the result, but there are waivers with regards to the lot's compliance with frontage and area, or, is there a waiver required for frontage?
No frontage and no area waivers.
So
It's a
these
shape factor.
these are compliant lots except for the shape factor, and that's really too deep, from that standpoint for it to be challenged as not something that the board could endorse. I was involved in a project in Berlin in which the board was presented with an A&R plan for lots that had no frontage, because the waivers were granted. And it really is, the registrar at the registry, the registrar is not going to review that. And there's no process for challenge except for someone challenging the building permit, in that the building permit was granted to someone that had an illegal lot, and the lot didn't meet zoning, but then they could rely on the comprehensive permit. So I don't know that challenge would go anywhere. Fairly straightforward. But it is a little different wrinkle from some 40B.
And I'd just like to add to that, which may give the board some reassurance, is that they're requesting a waiver for lot shape. If you look at our zoning bylaw now, the planning board has the authority to do that anyway at present. So.
Looking at the plan that you talked about with the proposed moved units or proposed moved septic, which do you prefer? Which do you think is better? Keeping the buildings or moving the septic?
I don't often get to weigh in on a preference, but I think the buildings in the more linear fashion with the tanks all in front of the building just makes sense in that maintenance pump truck can pull in and they're all accessible right there versus putting something a little bit remote. It's not far from it.
If the board would like, I could have conservation weigh in on that as well, to see if they have a preference. Because I am curious with the building pushed forward like that, how it's gonna look from the road now. Because it's not as in line with the other buildings, so I'm just curious, because I assume that rendering is based on the older building location, or the previous building location?
Correct. So I guess that particularly in light of the values were different also. We were saying 50 feet was the proposed, recommended by the board. But if it's 100, whatever it was.
It's 100, yeah.
That 41 to 50 seems not that, it seems like that would be a better option, but if it's a greater variance, then maybe they can weigh it on both. Any other questions here at the moment? Question in the back.
Anastasia Bentley, Still River Road. Just in regards to coming full circle on some of these things, the design reviewer had looked at Unit 8 and the accessibility of fire trucks on the top, the northern side of Unit 8 due to the height of our fire trucks or lack of ladder trucks. And I just wanted to make sure that, and I believe Mr. Duchesne had mentioned at some point that we had the new fire, I know we've changed fire chiefs, so I just want to make sure the new fire chief or whomever is the authoritative person now for the fire has approved the lack of a raised area on that northern side of Unit 8 for accessibility to the top floors, and that just that it's safe in regard to that corner.
I believe we submitted a letter from the new chief
I think the
with
only,
his final comments, and he recognized the fact that we were now sprinkling the buildings, and therefore his concerns about the water supply in Harvard versus Bulk. We resolved that issue. And the only outstanding, he, with regard to everything else, he said he was fine. His only issue was that he wanted to make sure that either through inspection or report, we make sure that we had sufficient cover over the, what is it, R20? H20 pipes. So you have his letter, and we've already committed to
and that was,
having him inspect.
and that's the current, that's Keith, was that, who's that? The fire, Keith? No.
Okay, it's Chief Jeff Wandrop.
Yeah, so that's the most recent, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So
If I can-
that's been addressed,
Yeah,
and he's approved that inaccessibility on that northern side. He's aware of that.
Yes.
Okay.
If I could just clarify on the Board of Health conversation, they did recently revise their regulations. Erica and I just discussed it, so what I was speaking to appears to be correct in that the setback for the Board of Health is now 50 feet versus what they previously had as 100 feet, and we will confirm that and give you a written, but the waiver requested, as originally drawn, I do not believe it required a Board of Health waiver for the tank versus the alternative location would indeed require a Board of Health waiver.
Any other questions from Roberts?
Carlo Von Road.
Mhm.
So just a clarification on the Board of Health, that you mentioned Board of Health. Isn't the reason they're subdividing the lot into two lots because if you have a private well, you only provide water for 25 people, and now if you're gonna go to, over that, it has to be a public well, and the Board of Health assumes 2 people per bedroom, so you're 36 people instead of 20, for the one lot. So that would change the well from private to public. I know there's enough frontage on the lot and enough square footage, because 6,000, 6.68 acre lot. But out of all that lot, the usable lot is very diminished to what is actually there for the lot itself.
If I can address that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
We had previously discussed that a couple hearings ago. In looking at this, the public water supply threshold is indeed 15 service connections, which we're well under no matter how you look at this project, or 24 non-transient people, so people that are staying in the residence. And we have this set up as 2 A&R lots, which has 2 wells that meet many of the required setbacks. In looking at these types of projects, we look at a lot of the past ones that the town has done. Sugar Road right now has the wells set up exactly the same way as this, where there's multiple lots with multiple wells. And there's nothing that would, in DEP's regulations, where we would take A&R lots and start grouping them together either. So this is under that threshold, and it allows them to have the private well service that we're proposing.
I know we didn't, when we just got these for tonight for condominium ducts, does anyone have any questions about them? We'll look into them. I'll use them in the next week or so.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
Yeah, okay.
We have time to do that.
Right. questions at the moment. We do have a question or comment.
Bob Marcel, 302 Glen Hill Road. Just got a question for Joe. Joe, at what point in the proceedings is our board allowed to, or are there any restrictions on obtaining legal counsel of their own to get advice prior to rendering a decision? The reason I ask is that it seems like, depending on what you might want to decide on this project, the obvious, or what would seem to be the obvious vote you cast may not be the correct legal one in terms of getting the outcome you want. It seems like there's a lot of nuances of law to be dealt with here, and you know, throughout the process, the developer has had legal counsel every step of the way, and is embellishing that tonight. So I'm just concerned that the board have you know, an equal understanding of how the law works in terms of how to cast their decision to get the outcome that you want at the end of the day. So, Joe, I don't know if you could shed some light on if that's something that's an option to the board at this point.
Mr. Chairman, varies from community to community. It is clear in the regulations that the board can impose peer review for technical matters and have the applicant pay for that. The board cannot do that with legal. So you would need to work through the Board of Selectmen to authorize the expenditure of town funds to pay for town council to advise the board. Some boards have town council at 40B hearings, every single hearing. You know, some will draft a decision and pass it by town council for that type of input, and you know, making sure that the legal aspects are right and ready. So I think we're heading down kind of the road of the ladder, but certainly it will be something that you can communicate with the selectmen and certainly get authorization for some involvement of town council.
So from a historical perspective, that we've done it both ways. So we have had, in earlier 40Bs, we've had town council involved in every hearing. Earlier hearings may have been more contentious in some respect because 40B was sort of new. At least that's my interpretation, have a better board, but we certainly, as part of the process, when we have a more robust draft of a decision, we do get that in front of the town council because, you know, the condominium documents, things like that, we don't have lawyers on the board, but, you know, so we do solicit that input, so.
Yeah, and the 2008 regulation changes did move a lot of the more complex legal documentation outside of the purview of the board and to the subsidizing agencies. And prior to that, boards were looking at regulatory agreements and monitoring agreements and trying to modify those, and now they're all standard documents that are clearly outside of the purview of the board to dive into.
Question, comment?
Thank you. Just to follow up on moving forward, the comprehensive permit, within that comprehensive permit is the project eligibility and site approval from April. Through this process, there's been changes, as is a normal thing to have happen through this process. I think this question may be for Joe, but I'm looking for the where the threshold is with the now misinformation that's in those documents, because there's been changes, and because, for example, the wetlands delineation is changing, so those numbers of how much is wetlands, which is very clearly spelled out in the project eligibility and site approval, is now, those numbers have changed. And things like, well, Natural Heritage has preliminarily approved, you know, a like site, but now, as Mr. Duchesne mentioned last week, Natural Heritage is going to get another look at this. So there's a whole paragraph in the comprehensive permit that specifies this kind of ideology about, you know, moving forward with something that was, and we're shifting away from that to a new kind of thought process. And so my question is, this document, the comprehensive permit, which has the project eligibility and site approval within it, that's going to move with this process, whether it moves into a buildable site and we're now building, or we move into an appeal process. At what point or what threshold does that misinformation or that those changes need to trigger a new application or a correction?
So I'm not sure if it's misinformation or has a.
Well, change.
It's changed.
It's the
Because I mean, I just,
evolution.
yeah, misinformation
Well,
sounds.
so if, for
sounds-
example, if, I'm sorry,
For me, it just sounds,
negative.
yeah, because it's,
So-
yeah, right.
Not adversarial, I'm sorry, but I guess my point is, so if it goes into an appeal,
Mhm.
and then it's a whole, it's a whole new board, Mass Housing is now looking at it, I think, or whomever, it's a whole new system and a whole new process, and we're not gonna be able to be there to give our input, but this document will be there to give input, and if that document doesn't reflect the changes that have come out of this process, then I wonder, I guess I'm just begging the question, there have been changes, at what point do those changes get updated on a comprehensive permit? Respectfully, sorry, didn't mean to come across nasty.
So with regard to process, there's a two-step process here that, the first one was an application to Mass Housing for a site approval letter, and that site approval letter was granted based on a set of, or information that accompanied that application. That was probably different in evolution, similar but different in evolution than what was presented within the comprehensive permit. Mass Housing, who issued the site approval letter, has its own process and does not they do not want to see or will not entertain the question, has this project changed enough in the interim, in the comprehensive permit process before the ZBA for you to comment in the interim. They have a process which is called final approval. Once the comprehensive permit is issued, the applicant needs to put some other documents, the regulatory agreement, the monitoring agreement, the lottery plan, all of those documents together, and submit that to Mass Housing for final approval. Mass Housing will review the comprehensive permit at that time to see whether or not the changes are substantial enough to change their position. Does this project meet their guidelines? Is it financially feasible in their minds? The same process they go through initially, they'll go through in issuance of that final approval. It's seen that the submission of the documents and the tracking that Eric is doing and that I'm trying to help with, that is the evolution of what collectively is the application and the public record that this board will then act on. And all of that information that's been submitted as part of that public record and therefore part of the comprehensive permit. So I don't know if that totally answers your question.
There's not necessarily a requirement that
It'd be
something have to go back to them at this point in time, say, okay, now
No.
things.
In
my understanding that it
once-
isn't, because that would just slow the process down, or it would never get to a decision point almost in time.
And projects evolve and change. I've seen much larger changes where a project has gone from, for sale condominiums to rental apartments in process. That the question did go back to Mass Housing and say, is this enough for them to start all over again? And the answer came back, no, just get through the process and send us the comprehensive permit and we'll look at it then. Once the comprehensive permit is issued, there's actually better guidelines on what constitutes a substantial or insubstantial change in the process for the board to react to that. But I think in process, really, anything is game, and it's seen that the project will evolve and should evolve into what the board feels is hopefully a project you can either approve with conditions, or if not, to deny.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so, given, okay, we have one more.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Martha Remington, Chairman of the Bolton Historical Commission. I think I mentioned at a previous meeting about artifacts found on the site, if and when this project commences. How can that be addressed in these documents so that we'll know there's a common repository for things, you know, that are found to get them to the historical society or whatever, even the state, you know, depending on Indian artifacts, and mainly it would be, I think, Native American artifacts, but there could be some 18th, 19th century artifacts. Once those bulldozers power up, you know, I think that I'm respectfully requesting that there be a serious effort to save things that are found within the site. There's gonna be a lot of earth removal, so that they're just not, wow, isn't this interesting, and then they get thrown back in the pile, or someone who's not really associated with the town, they may wander off, you know, because there are curiosities there, or that could be there.
So, how would that practically, I mean, I don't know how I would be able to identify something like an artifact. I mean, if it's just not digging, I mean, unless.
You need an archaeologist on site when they're doing excavation, that's
What-
simple.
Right, so does that.
To really do it right, you need an archaeologist there to look at what's being dug up.
I mean, the site doesn't rise to the level for that to have to happen, but Mass Historical Commission has grapples with this all the time and has some standard language that they put in. Most of the time it's within a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement between Mass Historical Commission and the applicant when a project has to go through the MEPA process, which is really when Bronna Simon and MHC get involved. What I would say in this case is maybe steal some of that language in the form of a condition, which basically says if the contractor runs into something that, and it explains what to do, to set the items aside, and then contact either Martha or the state archaeologist, and there's a process for that. And either Martha can talk to Bronna Simon, or I can dig up a sample condition, and we could offer it to the board for consideration.
Yeah, I mean, my first initial impression was that we'd just probably condition something that, you know, I'm sure the applicant would have some insight, or, you know, what they think they'd be able to do on that, but, you know, if there's language that you can obtain, then provide it to us, and we can make sure that that's, you know.
I can do
And
that.
then as we review the draft, if we get our draft put together,
Right.
we can have a review.
I'm not.
The language can
right,
get banted
right.
about if,
And you're right, I don't think it's overly onerous, but if the applicant believes it is, then they can object to it.
I wouldn't think this would happen, not from our application.
Excuse me, so then would it be recommended that once it's known that this is going to go forward, that perhaps the Historical Commission could contact Bronna Simon? I mean, there would be numbers that would be referring to this particular project, and they would, then we could ask further procedures, you know, to make sure that this happens. Let's put it this way, if we need to do something, I'd like to be alerted by either the zoning board of appeals or the developer, so that we know there is a,
Yeah, so as far
Something
from listening to what
put
Joe
in
just
place.
mentioned, that if the language would encompass some type of, if something was identified, then the next step is the applicant would have to contact either the state or the local historical, to say, okay, we found something we believe.
Right.
Come with it. I don't know if the zoning board would normally be the
Oh, it could be
two, unless they.
Could be a direct
Right.
connection. I mean, in the cases of, even when there's a historical home on site that was gonna be demolished, there's been conditions that have said, before demolition, the historical commission will be given access to the house, and they can mine anything that they feel is from the home, cornices and whatever architectural elements. So it's a cooperative effort. The historical commission wants to make sure that any artifacts or relics are preserved, so that the applicant would be enlisting their help to come and identify and then take possession of those items.
So then, Mr. Chairman, it might be appropriate that they, since the commission here in Bolton is appointed by the selectmen as an arm of Massachusetts Historical Commission, we could be contacted, and then we could also contact Brown Simon's office and find out the proper protocol.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just one other minor comment about the site plan stuff. When I was looking at them today, I noticed that the proposed lot lines and the lot layout plan don't appear to match what's shown on the other plans. So you may want to just take a look at that and
Okay.
see if it needs to be updated.
Civic plan?
Yeah, it's plan C20. It's in the lot lines don't appear to match up to the other sheets. So.
Question on the 25-foot requirements. So there were a number of units or dimensions, depending on which plan you look at, that have clearances of less than 25 feet to the wetlands. Is the 25-foot a DEP requirement? And what is their requirement?
I believe they have the 100-foot buffer. The
There is-
25-foot is a local.
There is no disturb zone in the Mass wetlands regulation.
Okay, so this is strictly local, there's no parallel state requirement?
No.
Another question about the lot lines. Have they ever been delineated, the lot lines between all the properties? Has that ever been done?
Sure.
I know when I bought my house lot, there was never, no delineation when I bought my property. And I had to pay for it myself on one side of the lot, because the seller did not delineate the lots. When he sold them, he wanted to sell the lots as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, so he didn't want to invest any money in doing any delineation to the lots. So there's 3 lots, so, I mean, no one knows where the lots end, obviously, because when they mowed the lots prematurely, before they were supposed to mow the lots, they mowed 20 feet onto my property without knowing it. So they mowed to the tree line, which I own 20 feet past the tree line. As far as I know from my measurements from my barn, I marked it out myself because, again, there was no delineation of the lots, so they mowed lots that on my property because they weren't.
So are they delineated?
No, I mean, the proposed units, we have an exhibit plan that's been floating around for several months now, and we are in excess of 100 feet from the lot lines with most of the units, the exterior lot lines. The demarcation, staking of lot lines would not be a requirement of a regular subdivision or an A&R plan. It's something that property owners afterwards can choose to do on their own. The only thing that would be required if there is a right-of-way, a subdivision right-of-way, generally those are bounded, where they're gonna have a concrete or a granite boundary. We're not proposing to do that here, so being that we're very, very far from our own lot lines, it would not be something that would be done in this case.
I know when I was on the planning board, we had several rather amazing cases that came up where people had built on other people's property, so it does happen.
It can, we're not denying that. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of construction control at this site. Everything mathematically will be laid out by the surveyors within this work area. The work area itself will be defined prior to any actual earth-moving activities here. And the limit of that work area is gonna be in excess of probably 80, 90 feet from the exterior lot lines in this case as well. So there's a very, very big buffer between the work area and the abutters properties.
Is it that expensive to put meets and bounds on this property?
Well, the meets and bounds are on the plan, and that would be referred to
Yeah, but I
in
mean
the
on the
deeds,
ground.
but truthfully, many of the lot corners are gonna be well within the wetlands. So we're not proposing to do that in this case.
Yet they still own my property by 20 feet, you know? So granted, it wasn't near the proposed building location, yet they still came on my property, mowed it the wrong time of the year, and crossed over onto my property, so.
If I may, I've actually been on the site. The edge of woods is clearly shown on our existing conditions plan, and the limit of mowing is interior of our own site of that edge of woods. I do not believe there's any encroachment onto Mr. Picarella's property.
And that line's not short, so they don't know, you know? I measured from my marked side of the property, I measured it myself, and walked it all off and taped it all off. And I'm like 20 feet past the tree line is my property. They mowed all the way up to the tree line. I don't know who mowed it, I don't know when, they mowed it illegally before the November 1st date. They mowed it mid-October. It was mowed, it was supposed to be mowed, and they contacted Boston, said that they made a mistake, and they mowed it prematurely, and this and that, and that was it. So that's what, I just wish that someone would mark the lines.
We disagree that we've
So-
encroached, we disagree that we've encroached
First two, you just identify.
Robert Pace owned.
Mhm.
We disagree that we've encroached, and maybe Mr. Picarella would like to engage a surveyor.
Well, maybe it's premature, but I would think if the project were to get approved and proceed, I'm sure that there should be some extreme sensitivity over where you're moving as you approach one of the abutters properties, you know, so that there's not, if he believes, and I'm not saying who's right, I mean, or that he's wrong, but if.
This is not an argument to have in this board, okay?
You know,
We disagree.
But at the end of the day, you know, if the project were to proceed, you know, the butters have to be treated
What condition that?
fairly in the comfort that their properties aren't gonna be, you know, encroached upon and disturbed. It'd be the, you know, the building site.
Yeah, I know the sensitivity of this project, but it's really a non-issue here in that our work area is interior to our exterior lot lines by close to 100 feet. So it's not like there's gonna be an errant bulldozer going in that direction. The work area is gonna be encompassed by siltation fences, and there's gonna be nothing going past that.
They asked for that the condition of the project that goes forward, that they delineate the line, because they're gonna have people, 35 people on their property walking around with no delineation of where the property line ends. They're gonna be walking around on our property. I think that should be a condition of the property that they mark the boundary lines so people know where they can and cannot go.
That's
I
the
don't
pleasure
even know
of
why
this
it was
board.
mowed, if it was what was the reason for mowing the property at that point if it wasn't anywhere near the building site?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just for clarity, as you know, we've shown on our plan, and we will have to physically show on the ground a defined limit of work in which all of the work will take place. And that, I believe that line will be delineated by erosion controls. That line, that location of those hay bales or wattles or whatever erosion control is required, that line is actually a surveyed line. The surveyors will go out, mark that line, stake it, and then the work limit protections will be put in place. All of our work would be proposed to occur within that area. So
So you wouldn't have errant.
Well, you're not gonna have
or-
people,
or-
I mean-
Or mowers or things outside, so that should hopefully.
no, as far as the mowing issue, that is an issue technically unrelated to this project. It's more a requirement of natural heritage, as I understand.
Correct.
We will obviously check to make sure that we are mowing under that order in the correct area. So we will verify that. I'm not saying we're gonna go out and do a full perimeter survey of this property. That's not what we're committing to. What I'm committing to is our work area will be delineated by survey. Everybody will be kept inside that survey delineated line. With respect to the mowing through natural heritage, we will verify that we're not encroaching next time that needs. Not saying we encroach this time, but I just mean we will verify. But there's no concern on this project that we're gonna be outside that work area.
There should be no concern, because there is concern. So,
Well,
but yes, I get your point.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, that's right.
bad choice of words. My
No,
point is,
it's okay.
by surveying and having a physical barrier put on the ground, that's about as much as you
That
can
should
do
alleviate
to
that
ensure
concern.
nobody's driving a bulldozer out 100 feet away.
All right, so I think at this point we should look at the calendars, probably see if we can get one more meeting in, even if it's to sort of compile, whatever structure for the draft decision, get the documents in order. We can maybe review that in an open forum, and then, where say we're button up against that 3/22 deadline. If we didn't get through.
I have a question on that.
So if we didn't get through that, then worst case is we could ask the applicant for potentially some part of an extension to finish that review, but other than that, if we can get through it, then we could then potentially close the public
Right.
hearing and then do our deliberations on the draft and then issue our decision within the required 40 days.
Right. There's nothing that compels you within the regulation to have that discussion and review of the draft decision within the open hearing. It's a good idea, certainly to talk about conditions that the applicant may object to or claim that would render the project uneconomic. That opens up a whole different can of worms, but the board could have a discussion at the next meeting if it was before the 22nd and feel comfortable enough at that point to close the hearing and not need an extension. But certainly if it sounded like you were close, but out of abundance of caution, you wanted to keep the public hearing open in case any additional materials were needed to be submitted, I think the applicant would see the writing on the wall and grant a 30-day extension for you to finish that task. The more you do towards finishing a decision will theoretically shorten the 40 days as far as actually issuing a decision. So to the applicant, it would be no loss of time, it's just semantics as far as whether you close the hearing, take the whole 40 days, or get an extension and do it in a couple weeks. But it's the board's purview, other than you can't go beyond the 22nd without assent of the applicant.
Correct. So, but my feeling is that we've had good success in obtaining some dialogue with the applicant in past projects if we had a, sort of a fairly good rough outline of here's the decision with the support documents and, sort of walk it through, all most recent waivers in the document so that we're sure that this is what we're going to opine on, and then.
No, it behooves the applicant to make sure that the record is complete, that the preliminary subdivision plan is accurate, and that Erica can reference that with the new date, that the waiver list is accurate. If, I think they've gotten some feedback, they need to make a decision on the units 1 and 2, and then formalize the actual waiver list that they want the board to act upon. So all that can happen in the next 2 weeks.
So, no, Brad, I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to.
No,
finish
that's
that
fine.
train of thought.
I just am concerned with one meeting left in the schedule, that all of the data that I would like to see may not be available, so I just would like to keep open an extension or some other.
Oh, clear, I mean.
I mean,
you're saying
from
if there's
other
something-
boards, not necessarily from the applicant, but, we have some issues with this property. I certainly would like some clarity on, so.
Mhm. So to that point, what specific points so that we can have Erica follow with those boards to say, get.
Well, I'd like to see
maybe back
something
that
from Mass
first.
Heritage, and then that may not be something that's ever gonna come in time, and I'd like to see something from the Conservation Commission to review the waivers that they see, and, that certainly is something that'll be helpful from my point of view. And, if the evidence isn't submitted, then it isn't submitted, and we make a decision based on what we have.
Right. So I guess the Board of Health and the, Concom would be the most recent documents, or once you
Yeah.
qualify or confirm that those documents.
Yeah, Board of Health is certainly something that we need to have.
So if we had input back from them for the next hearing, then that would help.
Clearing the waivers, the most
Finalize
recent
those
letters.
waivers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mr. Chairman, couple of questions, I guess. One, we would like to hear from the board with regard to this proposal about moving units 1 and 2. It really comes down to, we can scoot them out with the exception of a little bit of that deck in the 25 foot, so that our waivers for those 2 buildings will be, I guess reduced, right? We're farther away. However, as Seth explained, it creates a new waiver because now our tank, instead of meeting the board's 50-foot distance, would be 41 feet. So we'd need a 9-foot waiver from a Board of Health regulation by reducing the waiver we need on the local Conservation Commission. The board asked us to look at doing that, and we did it. However, as Seth mentioned, from a practical standpoint, moving those tanks to the side there to pick up a few feet, creates additional maintenance and replacement issues ultimately for the association. However, it's almost a balancing act. Does the board feel, that the additional buffer we're creating to the wetland is more advantageous than the reduction in the other buffer?
That's what we think we were asking Board of Health.
Okay, so, all right, so that's fine. If you don't feel you can give us that now, but of course, we want to be able to finalize the plan and to give you that final waiver list. Although you've got them both now, I mean, you can figure it out. It's not gonna change depending on which you choose. As far as the Conservation Commission input, you certainly have every right to ask them, but in reading the last conservation letter that Mr. has always asked me to respond to in writing. I think the commission has made their final stand. I wouldn't expect anything different. They have
Well, that
suggested.
is fine, but I wanna know why.
Oh, okay, that's fine, all right, that's great. I
It's
just
not
thought their
their
letter was
opinion.
pretty
I
clear
wanna
when
know
it
how they
said,
base their
I
opinion.
thought it was pretty clear when it said, don't grant any waivers and deny the project, so. But if you think that might change, by all means, ask them for another opinion. We are in agreement with your sort of process, Mr. Chairman, if the board could, if we could find a way to hold another meeting by March, and get to the point of looking at a draft decision in an open meeting, we would appreciate that, and we would like to participate in that. To the extent you're able to achieve that, I know my clients would be reasonable if you needed a couple weeks to get another meeting in April without having to close. We will be reasonable, but I like the idea that we're gonna push to try and meet in March and at least get something in writing so that we start down that path. Because it's achieving that is what I think will allow my client to be more reasonable in granting you more time.
And to that point, we're starting that process. I mean, we have Eric pulling together, so the outline,
Sure.
the procedural
Great.
history, so that we're not, we know what we're responsible for on our side. So, to the extent we can make it collaborative to at least make sure we get the best input we have from both sides, and so we have to then close it and actually finalize it. So that's our plan. So with that said, I think, Brian, you said what are the dates you could meet? Because you had some travel.
Tuesday the 19th?
You could meet Tuesday the 19th, you're saying? Does anyone have any conflict with Tuesday, March 19th?
At the moment, I think I'm all set. The only question is where.
Well, Eric will answer find out, I think. It's good for me, having that date, I know.
That could change.
Yeah.
No, right, but
Right
like
now,
anything else,
no.
we have to pick a time. And it does give, let's see. This gives almost 2 weeks for the, for any of the boards to get back. Accommodate that, no one up at this point in the project.
With the 19th, Erica.
That's fine with me. The only thing is the Holton building and town hall are not available, so we could shoot for the library again, and I think it has to be at the library, or the Holton Safety Building, I guess.
I wouldn't mind the library, I mean, it's
No, the
good
library
parking,
would be good.
and it's,
It's just- I don't know if it's
it's got a
available.
nice room, but,
You can't overpay for people.
yeah.
What about room in the square?
Yeah. Any of those Skype things.
Yeah, I guess that would be a backup as
So,
well.
yeah,
Important enough.
so you could make it date and time specific, but not,
No, let's schedule it for the library like we did last time. I'll find out if it's available. If it's not, then I'll have to post a new location.
So motion to continue the hearing until March 19th, Tuesday, 7 PM at the town library?
Is the public safety building available?
They are usually very booked, so I think we're safer going with the library.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Brian. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Members of the board.
Thank you. Well, we have to, we'll have the same vote we had. So what they did is, they had a.
You? You're water bill now,
Sorry, I'm not. Yeah, put together a supplemental.
been a good year,
And
eh?
they sent it over to
The only one that I commented,
for
you
one.
guys submitted a bill from 2015, and
Right.
all I did was comment saying, quick release it.
For one.
Yeah,
It
okay.
should be good.
Okay, all right. Okay, if I'm not, I'll call you. Okay, thank you. I said, what the hell? I think I'm doing everything right.
No, I think you are.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Spelling errors. In, first name spelled wrong, last name spelled wrong.
So who put that together?
Our attorney.
Okay.
So the law, so the law company.
We got 40 days, 27.
So what's the gist of it? What's the, I haven't read it.
This is something, parameters around it, what they can operate. Where's your house in Lubbock? Right on Main Street with. Yes. It's across the street.
I rented my house from Westwood.
Oh, very nice. I was just talking to Eileen Hayes, she's,
You still have that option. Something here,
family owns a place in Westwood. Yeah, she was telling me some guy who owns a company
we have an amended decision.
owns two big places in Westwood, they bought the lot.
So,
That's and he bought.
so we had to vote in the session to.
That electronic copy that you showed me, was that from the Board of Health website?
Yeah.
So weird, I literally downloaded it the other day.
So we have an item on the.
He now owns the biggest buildings in our development. What's he up to?
That's great.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
I'll download it.
This is kind of like just business purposes. We still have to have a meeting. This isn't a hearing, we're just, we were told that we should vote on it before it goes to the hearing.
So this is to formalize
It looks like changes have been made in the document. This document.
Yes, this has been updated with the correct name. Gerard, I had it underneath the large sign side.
Lot has three houses.
Conditions are really in the
It's a separate-
decision. Which the attachment is what the board will be voting on.
No, I will, all right, I'll take care of that.
It should be in there, yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, no.
All right, I'll look into that, Joe, thanks, and I will give you written responses to those two letters,
This is
although.
on page 5. Your email talks about this amendment decision. These are the exhibit A.
Oh, okay. One of the, oh, the seven, right. Yeah, no, okay, I'll follow up with that.
So one of the things we had asked is whether special events was clearly defined in this. And the Board of Selectmen were saying, we think it is, but even still, in order to have a special event, they have to go back and select approval. So that's fine, thank you. That would be another line of, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
So we didn't think special events was clearly defined, but
This one here that's all signed off.
selectmen kind of said, don't worry about it.
After that now?
So when we she's finished talking. Okay, so the next item of business is to Where's our
Oh,
agenda for tonight?
that's a nice area.
The next item of business is to vote to accept the settlement agreement with respect to litigation of Cultivated Council LLC. So, just a quick overview, we had a meeting, an executive session that was called by the law committee, where we were presented with the settlement agreement that our attorney has provided to the 401 Main Street parties, and they came to an agreement, and so we were asked to, the law committee made a vote in that executive session, we made a vote in that executive session, and we're going to sort of memorialize that vote in open session tonight. So,
How does that apply to the schedule? We have to schedule a public hearing, don't we, before?
yeah, this is just to accept the, right, so we'll still, that after we have this, we will have to have an open hearing on the.
We'll have to have a public hearing
Public
for the
hearing.
actual amended decision.
Right. So, but that time, like, they'll still be able to have changes to this, like, as far as even editorial, they cleaned up in this decision some of the typographical spelling of names and whatnot, but it's not consistent in the, on the documents in the back. There's still misspelling of, on item 15 on my name, they have my last name spelled wrong. In the other documents, it was, my first name was spelled wrong, but now it's the last name. So,
In the amended decision, they
yes,
did that?
uh-huh.
I think that can be worked out through the hearing process.
Right, okay, so-
What you're voting on tonight is just the settlement agreement, really.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Well, you were talking about the settlement.
It's all attached. I mean, so the settlement agreement has attached to it the appeals document and I put it
In the amended decision.
in the amendment. So I just wanted to be sure that at some point, yes, we'll clean up all these small.
Yeah. I mean, town council had said that during the executive session
Mhm, yeah.
that it could be
Mhm, okay.
completed during the hearing process.
So we just have to reduplicate that same,
Mhm.
so we had a motion at the exec committee to accept the settlement agreement in substantial conformity with the document in front of us. Here we would need a second.
Second?
Second by Kay Stoner, and then all in favor of accepting the settlement agreement? Aye.
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 So,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question concerning the agreement? So I'm Adam Costa, you might remember I
yeah,
represented a
you
number
came
of the,
into one of the
I
hearings.
remember the neighbors, I did, I came to a couple of them. The neighbors weren't named in the litigation, so they haven't been a party to that litigation. It's been really between the town and the property owner. You mentioned that there's a proposed amended decision that I think you said was an exhibit maybe to the settlement agreement. I presume the settlement agreement, now that it's been voted in open session, is a public document?
It is.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so my clients will certainly inquire of me, and so I just tell them if they want to see a copy of it.
I'm gonna post it to the ZBA's webpage.
That's great, I'll let them know that, and then they'll be free to come to the public hearing whenever, you haven't scheduled the date for
No,
that
not
yet?
yet, no.
Okay,
This was the first
step in the
sort of step
process.
in that process, right?
Understood.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, okay. So do we have, how does that happen? Do you have to post something, or do we have to pick a
It's the
date on
same,
that?
it's
or-
the same as any other, you know, in terms of special permits or whatever for the
So do we have
for
a,
the
do we
ZBA,
have
it's the same process.
a requirement of within so many days of us agree or accepting this?
No.
Do we now have to
No,
have
no.
40 days to open something, or do we have just pick a date?
It follows chapter 40A, so if it's similar to a special permit, we'd have 60 days to, then again, I mean, it's not like an application being submitted. I don't think there's a deadline, as long as we get it. Once the public hearing is scheduled, I think that's fine.
So
I
is
can
that
double check
something,
with
is that
council,
something
but I don't-
we can do in April and not?
Yeah, I mean, it
rush
takes time just to advertise and notify the abutters. I usually always say to an applicant, it takes 4 to 6 weeks. So, you know, it could be as soon as, you know, April. So what I'll do is I'll send a doodle poll out to the bowl,
Okay.
to the
that-
board to
We
coordinate
don't have to make
schedules.
that
No,
tonight.
no.
Okay, perfect.
So just so I know what happened, they appealed the decision, because I've missed a few of these meetings.
Yeah,
They-
sure.
They appealed, and then we worked with the council to come up with
The
a,
town council,
okay,
right.
to come up with a.
Yes, the town council, at the beginning of the process, did try to engage the group of neighbors, but they declined to be part of that mitigation process. Kay and Brad and I had gone
Yeah.
to the town council's office and we were with cultivate counseling to figure out, what conditions we could come to an agreement on, so.
Because if we didn't do that, they could have technically, they were trying to take the town to court. Correct.
Yes, so that would have been the other option, is
Right.
rather than settle, go to court.
In the meantime, there was a case in Lincoln where Silver Amendment was brought up and got shot down in court. So I think there was some pressure from that side of their lawyer's opinion, because
Yeah, it
it
was very similar to.
wasn't a sure thing anymore. So I don't know at this point. I think the thing about the agreement that I like is they can't transfer the property in the future. And there are some very strict, before we had an open field, anything that they
Right.
said was agricultural was,
Right, then it was
Yeah.
deemed that from now on.
so.
So the only thing that we, and Andy made a good point, was that they maybe we tighten up just in one of the sections, sort of refer back to section 1 and really potentially limit the scope of special events.
Yeah.
The selectmen representatives were less concerned that the language is, because they said once they've already got sign off, they didn't pursue, you want to go back to them and say, okay, we've recommended some edits
Right.
to the document. So they said they believe there's enough in there to put the parameters that we expect. So, and they said, because of some provisions that if they were going to have a special event, that they would have to solicit input from the police on, traffic or the selectmen, that the selectmen are aware that they know that they have to sort of control what would happen. You agree with that assessment? Pretty much.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I think having said that,
I will send you a poll and we'll get that scheduled.
so motion, anything else for any items? No? So motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second, by all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.